3:44 a.m. The Red Sea. Southern approaches. No moon. Water black as oil and perfectly flat, stretching from the Yemeni coast to the Eritrean shore in an unbroken mirror that reflected nothing but stars. The kind of darkness that makes you believe the world has been reduced to your ship and the sound of water against steel. 41 nautical miles northwest of the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, the narrow choke point that funnels every ship traveling between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean through a gap barely 18 miles wide. A convoy of 9 vessels was making its way north at 11 knots. 6 commercial container ships, 2 American-flagged bulk carriers, and 1 maritime prepositioning ship, the USS Pomeroy, loaded with prepositioned military equipment bound for a U.S. base in Djibouti. Around them, close escort, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, USS Gravely, DDG-107, positioned 2 miles ahead of the convoy's lead ship with her radar painting the full 360-degree picture in continuous rotation. 60 miles to the east, behind the black wall of the Yemeni coastal mountains, 312 Houthi fighters, technicians, and launch crew personnel had spent the previous 11 days executing what their commanders called Operation Chains of the Sea. It was, by any objective measure, the most ambitious strike operation the Houthi movement had ever attempted. Not the sporadic missile launches and drone attacks that had been harassing Red Sea shipping for months. Something different. Something designed to be definitive. Something designed to prove that the southern Red Sea was, as their propaganda had proclaimed for 2 years, a graveyard for American power. The plan had 5 components, all timed to execute simultaneously at 3:44 a.m. local time. First, 22 Houthi fast boats, civilian fishing vessels modified with C-802 anti-ship missile launchers and packed with shape-charge explosives in their bows, were positioned in 7 groups along the Yemeni coastal shallows between Ras Isa and the Bab-el-Mandeb. Their orders were to close within 5 miles of the convoy at maximum speed and fire their missiles, then close to ramming distance against the commercial ships. Second, 18 Tufan anti-ship cruise missiles, Iranian-supplied weapons with a range of 80 kilometers and a 350-kilogram warhead, had been pre-positioned on mobile launchers in 3 separate coastal sites behind cliff faces that blocked radar line of sight from the sea. They would fire in a single, coordinated ripple launch, all 18 within a 40-second window. Third, 36 Shahed 136 loitering munitions and 22 Qasef-2 K explosive drones had been launched from 3 sites in the Houthi region, beginning at 3:19 a.m., 25 minutes before the main attack, flying slow and low on a programmed route designed to arrive over the convoy at precisely 3:44 a.m., converging from the north and northeast to divide USS Gravely's defensive attention. Fourth, a mass salvo of 16 Badr-1 ballistic missiles, domestically produced Houthi weapons with a 500-kilogram warhead and a range of 150 kilometers, had been moved to launch positions in the Sanaa highlands. Their targets were not the ships. Their targets were the naval support facilities at Djibouti, Camp Lemonnier, the P-8 Poseidon operating base, and the fuel terminal that sustained U.S. naval operations across the entire theater. Remove the logistics base the Houthi planners had calculated, and the USS Gravely would be alone and unsupported. Fifth and final, 2 Iranian-provided Ghadir midget submarines, operated by IRGC advisors embedded with Houthi naval forces, had been positioned in the approaches south of the strait since 3 a.m., carrying a combined 4 lightweight torpedoes targeting the USS Pomeroy and the lead commercial vessel. The Houthi commander who had planned this operation briefed his senior leadership with absolute confidence. 1 destroyer, he said, cannot stop 18 missiles, 36 drones, 22 fast boats, 16 ballistic missiles, and 2 submarines simultaneously. America will lose ships tonight. The Red Sea belongs to the resistance. He was wrong about all of it, because the Houthis had made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: they believed USS Gravely was the only American warship in the area. She was not. 68 miles northwest of the Convoy, running without lights and in strict emissions control, USS Mason, DDG-87, had been holding station since midnight. And 112 miles to the south, USS The Sullivans, DDG-68, was closing the strait at 28 knots. Both ships had been repositioned from their last known locations in the previous 36 hours, after signals intelligence from the NSA's collection assets in Djibouti had detected encrypted Houthi command traffic referencing a major forthcoming operation. The repositioning had been done quietly, without any public announcement, under orders from 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. The second mistake. They believed the Shahed drones and Kasef munitions launched at 3:19 a.m. were undetected. They were not. The MQ-9 Reaper drone that had been orbiting at 22,000 feet over the southern Red Sea since 11 p.m. had picked up the thermal signatures of the drone launches within 90 seconds of ignition. That data was transmitted in real time to USS Gravely's Combat Information Center, to 5th Fleet, and to the E-2D Hawkeye that had been airborne from USS Dwight D. Eisenhower since 1:30 a.m. Because USS Eisenhower and her strike group had not departed the Red Sea theater as Houthi intelligence had assessed. She had repositioned. She was now operating 206 miles northwest of the Convoy, behind the radar horizon, her strike wing armed and in various states of alert readiness. The third mistake. The two Ghadir midget submarines had been tracked since their departure from a Houthi-controlled coastal inlet near Al-Muka at 8 p.m. the previous evening. The P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft operating from Camp Lemonnier had dropped a passive sonobuoy field across the southern strait approaches at 10 p.m. as a matter of routine. Both submarines had passed through the field at 11:47 p.m. and 12:09 a.m. respectively, their acoustic signatures recorded, classified, and transmitted to Pacific Fleet Submarine Command. By 1 a.m., USS Annapolis, a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine operating at depth in the strait itself, had both contacts localized to within 400 meters and was shadowing them silently. She had been authorized weapons release on confirmation of hostile action. The fourth mistake. The Houthi planners had assumed their coastal missile sites behind the cliff faces were invisible to American radar because they were positioned behind terrain that blocked line of sight from sea level. That was correct. They were invisible to sea-level radar. They were not invisible to the E-8C stars flying at 40,000 feet over the Gulf of Aden, whose radar looked down across the Yemeni coastal terrain and had been mapping every vehicle movement, every launcher position, and every fuel truck relay for 9 consecutive hours. All 3 coastal Tufan launch sites had been in the JSTARS targeting database since 1:17 a.m. Their coordinates had been uplinked to USS Mason's Tomahawk fire control system at 2:44 a.m. The fifth mistake, and it was the one that revealed the fundamental nature of the miscalculation, was the assumption that a simultaneous multi-axis attack would overwhelm a single Aegis ship. That assumption failed to account for the fact that the Aegis combat system was not designed to be used by a single ship in isolation. It was designed to be networked. The Cooperative Engagement Capability, CEC, linked USS Gravely, USS Mason, and USS The Sullivans into a single distributed fire control network, sharing radar tracks in real time across a 300-mile operational area so that any ship could fire on a track detected by any other ship's radar. 3 Aegis ships, networked together, did not have 3 times the capacity of 1. They had exponentially more because the geometry of 3 radar systems, covering different aspects of the threat envelope, eliminated virtually every blind spot that a single ship would have. The Houthis had planned to attack 1 ship. They were about to discover they had attacked 3, networked into 1. What happened in the next 31 minutes was not a battle. It was a systematic, machine-precise erasure of everything the Houthis had spent 11 days preparing. At 3:43 a.m., 1 minute before the planned Houthi H hour, USS Gravely's commanding officer received the pre-authorization for weapons release from 5th Fleet transmitted on the encrypted command net. The authorization covered all three surface combatants, USS Annapolis and the Eisenhower's strike wing. It had a single triggering condition. The moment any Houthi weapon crossed the designated engagement boundary, all pre-planned fires were authorized to execute simultaneously. At 3:44 a.m. and 7 seconds, the first Tufan missile ignited at coastal site Alpha near Ras Isa. By 3:44 a.m. and 11 seconds, all 18 Tufan missiles were in the air. By 3:44 a.m. and 14 seconds, USS Annapolis had fired her first Mark 48 torpedo. By 3:44 a.m. and 19 seconds, USS Mason had fired her first Tomahawk at coastal launch site Alpha, and USS Gravely had begun her SM-2 engagement sequence against the drone swarm. The Tufan missiles flew their sea-skimming profile at 4 meters altitude, closing the convoy at subsonic speed. 18 tracks, converging from 3 coastal sites on 3 different bearings. Against a single Aegis ship, this would have represented a serious saturation challenge. Against 3 networked Aegis ships sharing a common air picture, it was a geometry problem with a known solution. USS Gravely engaged the Western Group. USS Mason, 68 miles away, contributed SM-2 fire control solutions to the Northern Group via CEC without her radar even illuminating. She used Gravely's radar data to solve her own firing solutions. USS The Sullivans, closing from the south, took the Eastern Group. In 94 seconds of continuous firing, all 18 Tufan missiles were intercepted. Not 17, all 18. The last one was killed 4 nautical miles from the nearest commercial ship in the convoy. The drone swarm was handled simultaneously. The Shahed 136 loitering munitions and Kasef drones converging from the north and northeast ran into a wall of ESSM block, 2 missiles from USS Gravely and USS Mason, supplemented by the Phalanx CIWS systems aboard both warships and the commercial vessel's defensive systems that had been pre-activated on 5th Fleet's advisory. 51 of the 58 drones were killed by ESSM. The remaining 7 were destroyed by Phalanx at ranges between 1 and 3 nautical miles. 0 reached the convoy. The fast boats died on the water. At 3:44 a.m., as the missiles launched and the drone swarm converged, the 22 Houthi fast boats throttled their engines and turned toward the convoy from their coastal hiding positions in the shallows. They were 41 nautical miles away, a 60-minute run at full speed. They never got close. At 3:46 a.m., 4 FA-18 Super Hornets from USS Eisenhower, which had been holding at their pre-briefed loiter position 60 miles northwest at 15,000 feet, received their strike authorization and turned southeast. Each aircraft carried 6 AGM-65 Maverick air-to-surface missiles and 4 Mk-82 500-pound guided bombs. At 3:58 a.m., 14 minutes after the first Houthi weapon fired, the FA-18S arrived over the fast boat formation. What followed took 9 minutes. 22 fast boats, 31 Mavericks. No misses. Every boat burning or sinking. The last surviving fast boat turned back toward the Yemeni shore at 4:07 a.m., with 2 of its crew still alive. It made it 3 miles before a Maverick found it. The Ghadir midget submarines lasted 11 seconds after USS Annapolis opened fire. The first Mark 48 AD cap, traveling at 55 knots on a pre-computed intercept solution, struck the lead Ghadir at 3:44 a.m. and 51 seconds. The submarine's pressure hull, designed for a vessel displacing 90 tons, was not built to survive a torpedo detonating against its midship section. It broke in 2 and sank in 40 meters of water in less than 90 seconds. The second Ghadir, which had attempted to turn and run on hearing the explosion, was struck by the second torpedo at 3:44 a.m. and 59 seconds. 8 seconds later, neither submarine fired a single weapon. Neither came within 7 miles of the convoy. The Badr 1 ballistic missiles targeting Camp Lemonnier were the last element of the Houthi plan to execute, and they were dealt with before a single warhead reached its target. The 16 Baader-1 launchers in the Sanaa Highlands had been in the JSTARS database since 1:17 a.m. When the weapons release authorization came at 3:43 a.m., USS Mason's preloaded Tomahawk fire missions executed automatically. 16 Block 5 Tomahawks, 1 per launcher, were already in flight before the first Baader-1 ignited. But Tomahawks travel at 500 miles per hour, and the Sanaa Highlands were 90 miles from the coast. The Tomahawks would arrive in 11 minutes. The Baader-1S launched at 3:48 a.m. They were detected immediately by SBIRS and tracked through their boost and mid-course phases by the Aegis radars of all 3 surface combatants. USS The Sullivans, now positioned at the southern end of the strait with clear engagement geometry, fired a salvo of SM-3 Block 1A interceptors beginning at 3:51 a.m. Of 16 Baader-1 ballistic missiles aimed at Camp Lemonnier, 14 were destroyed in their terminal descent phase by SM-3 interceptors. 1 impacted in the Gulf of Tajura, 3 miles from the Djibouti coastline. 1 impacted on the outskirts of Obak, with no military effect. Camp Lemonnier was unscathed. At 3:59 a.m., 4 minutes after the Tomahawks reached the Sanaa Highlands, all 16 Baader-1 launch sites ceased to exist. The Tomahawks had been timed to arrive not when the launchers were still loaded, but after the Baader-1s had already fired, meaning the Houthi crews had no choice but to remain at their sites through the launch sequence, and were still present when the Tomahawks arrived. The opening phase was over. The Houthis had fired everything they had. Nothing had reached its target. Now came the response. Because the initial engagement, the interception of every Houthi weapon was only the first 31 minutes. The strikes that followed were the part that would be remembered. At 4:15 a.m., USS Eisenhower began launching her second strike package. This was not the 4-ship alert flight that had killed the fast boats. This was the full air wing. 28 FA-18 Super Hornets, 8 F-35C Lightning IIs, 4 EA-18G Growlers, and 2 E-2D Hawkeyes, launched in a 50-minute cycle that lit the northwestern Red Sea with afterburner plumes stretching from the flight deck to altitude. Their target list, compiled and refined over 9 days of ISR collection, covered 67 coordinates across 7 Yemeni governorates. The F-35Cs went first. Invisible to the Houthi radar network, which was already degraded after the Tomahawk strikes on coastal sites had taken out 3 of its 6 primary nodes. They penetrated the Yemeni interior at high altitude and began their methodical work. The Houthi weapons storage complex in the mountains east of Sanaa, a network of tunnels and surface bunkers assessed to contain the bulk of remaining Iranian-supplied anti-ship missile stocks, was struck by 6 JASSMER cruise missiles, released from standoff range. The complex had been hardened against aerial attack. It had not been hardened against weapons that flew around mountains at wave-top altitude and struck from angles that no conventional bomb could achieve. 4 of the 6 JASMMs penetrated the hardened entry points. The resulting secondary explosions from the stored missile propellant were detected on seismographs in Riyadh. The drone manufacturing and storage facility near Hodeidah, the site where Iranian technicians had been assembling Shahed 136SS for Houthi use for 14 months, the facility that had produced the bulk of the drone threats that had bedeviled Red Sea shipping, was struck simultaneously by 8 GBU-31 JDAMs from 2F/A-18S. 8 impacts across a facility that covered 6 hectares. Every building destroyed, every assembly jig, every parts inventory, every Iranian technician's workbench, gone in 30 seconds of precision strikes. The naval base at Ras Isa, the Houthi coastal facility that had served as the staging point for fast boat operations against Red Sea shipping, was struck by 14 Tomahawks from USS Gravely and USS Mason firing their second salvos. The fuel storage tanks at Ras Isa had been full, recently resupplied from an Iranian-connected oil transfer operation 3 days prior. The resulting fire burned for 16 hours and was visible from satellite imagery, as a thermal anomaly the size of a city block. The radar installation at Al-Muqa was struck by 2 HARM missiles from an CA-18G Growler the moment it illuminated its search radar at 4:23 a.m. The operator had switched it on to understand what was happening to his forces. The HARM found him in 4 seconds, destroyed in 6. The mobile command center that had coordinated Operation Chains of the Sea, a reinforced convoy of 4 vehicles operating from the Marib Desert that Signals Intelligence had tracked for 61 hours, was struck by a single AGM-158 at 4:44 a.m. The JASSM's precision navigation placed the warhead within 2 meters of the lead vehicle. The operational commander of the Houthi naval campaign was in that vehicle. By 5:47 a.m., 2 hours and 3 minutes after the first Houthi weapon fired, the strike package had expended its assigned ordnance and the aircraft were recovering to the Eisenhower. The fires burning across 7 sites in western Yemen were visible from the commercial ships of the convoy, which had continued north through the Bab-el-Mandeb at 11 knots without deviating from their course, their masters watching the horizon glow orange to the east. The final assessment told the complete story with the precision that only overhead imagery and signals intercepts can provide. Of the 18 Tufan anti-ship missiles, 18 destroyed, 0 reaching the convoy. Of the 58 drones, 58 destroyed, 0 reaching the convoy. Of the 22 fast attack boats, 22 sunk or destroyed, 0 coming within 7 miles of any vessel. Of the 2 Ghadir midget submarines, 2 sunk, 0 torpedoes fired. Of the 16 Badr, 1 ballistic missiles aimed at Camp Lemonnier. 14 intercepted by SM-3, 2 impacts in uninhabited areas, Camp Lemonnier fully operational. Houthi facilities destroyed in the retaliatory strikes. The Sada missile storage complex, the Hudaida drone manufacturing facility, the Ras Isa naval base, the Al-Muqa radar installation, 3 coastal missile battery sites, 4 additional weapons storage facilities, 2 command and control nodes, the mobile command convoy. Total, 16 facilities eliminated across 7 governorates. Houthi personnel casualties, assessed by Signals Intelligence intercepts of Houthi internal communications. 289 fighters, technicians, and commanders killed. 141 wounded. The commander of Operation Chains of the Sea killed. Both IRGC submarine advisors killed when USS Annapolis's torpedoes destroyed their vessels. American casualties, 0. Not 1 sailor wounded. Not 1 aircraft lost. Not 1 ship scratched. The USS Gravely's commanding officer filed his after-action report at 7:30 a.m. and noted that his crew had performed every intercept sequence within the time parameters established in their last combat readiness exercise. He recommended commendations for 14 sailors. He noted that the Combat Information Center team had performed, in his assessment, flawlessly. The USNS Pomeroy arrived at Djibouti at 11:14 a.m. on time, unharmed. The 9 commercial vessels completed their transit of the Bab-el-Mandeb by 7 a.m. They delivered their cargo. The global shipping lanes that the Houthi movement had spent 2 years trying to close remained open. By 9 a.m., 5th Fleet had repositioned additional assets into the southern Red Sea. 3 additional Arleigh Burke destroyers joined USS Gravely on escort rotation. P-8 Poseidons and MQ-9 Reapers established a continuous ISR orbit over Houthi coastal territory that would not be interrupted. In Sanaa, the Houthi leadership convened an emergency council. They had launched the most complex operation in their history, fired every category of weapon simultaneously, and the convoy had arrived safely in Djibouti. The silence from Houthi state media lasted 6 hours. Then they announced a great victory. The satellite imagery told a different story. 16 sites burning or collapsed across 7 governorates. 289 dead. 11 days of planning. 31 minutes to destroy. This is what happens when a militia armed with Iranian weapons mistakes the patience of the United States Navy for an inability to respond. This is what happens when you spend 11 days planning to close a shipping lane that America has protected for 80 years, and you believe one destroyer is all that stands between your ambition and your goal. The Red Sea is not closed. It has never been closed. And the ships that keep it open, gray hulls with rotating radar antennas, cruise at their stations in the dark at 3:44 a.m., weapons ready, waiting, are not going anywhere. The convoy arrived in Djibouti at 11:14 a.m. On time, unharmed. The watch continues.